Grandma, don't drink that, please, just trust me. My grandson's voice sliced through the laughter and wine glasses clinking at David's birthday dinner. I blinked at him, confused. What could possibly be wrong? The restaurant was lovely, the wine smooth, the company, well, familiar. But when I saw the terror in Ben's eyes, I knew something was very, very wrong. He leaned in closer, whispering, "We need to leave, right now, before they take everything." At 71, I'd built an empire from nothing, brick by brick, tenant by tenant. But nothing prepared me for betrayal from the very people I raised. That night wasn't about cake or candles. It was a trap. And the people I thought I knew had laced the celebration with something far more dangerous than secrets. By the time you finish this story, you'll question who you trust and how far desperation can go when money is involved. At 71, I lived alone in a modest yet warm house on the north side of Seattle. Not because I couldn't afford luxury, but because I'd grown allergic to extravagance that came without effort. Everything I owned had been earned, not inherited, not gifted, and certainly never stolen. My name was Margaret Ellison, and if you drove down Ellison Lane near the Fremont district, you'd be traveling through part of my life's work. That street, like 6 others across King County, bore the quiet stamp of Sullivan Estates, my business built from a single duplex I'd bought at 30. Back then, my husband Daniel and I had barely scraped together the down payment. I painted the walls myself while he fixed the plumbing. We took no vacations. We deferred buying a second car until that first property paid for itself. By the time Daniel died in 2003, we owned 7 buildings. Today, I own 32 rental properties totaling over $9.2 million in value. Not bad for a girl from Spokane who once couldn't afford new boots for the winter. Despite the success, my house remained filled with silence, the kind that came after years of giving without reciprocation. I had one child, Elena, beautiful, ambitious, sharp-tongued. She married David Campbell, a man who dressed like wealth but couldn't hold a business together for longer than a tax quarter. I should have known. I did know. But when Elena said, "He's the one," I bit my tongue. Over the years, their financial calls became routine. "Mom, we're in a tight spot." "Margaret, this investment is just one signature away from changing our lives." And I gave. The first time, I sold our summer cabin to cover Elena's final year at Cornell. The second, I liquidated one of my best-performing buildings to pay off David's failed organic cafe loans. By the third request, an app promising to revolutionize meal delivery, I began to feel less like a mother and more like a checkbook. Still, I kept giving. Because love makes you do irrational things, especially when it comes from someone who never really says thank you. Only, what else? The only person who hadn't disappointed me was Ben, my grandson, 20 years old, second-year business student at the University of Washington. A quiet soul, tall like his grandfather, with eyes that carried questions instead of judgments. He came by almost every Sunday for tea and property talk. While his parents belittled old-school landlords, Ben took notes when I talked about tenant turnover and rent control caps. He listened, really listened. And he never once asked me for money. So when Elena and David knocked on my door that Tuesday evening with smiles too wide and voices too cheerful, I already sensed they wanted something. They arrived unannounced, as always. David wore a navy suit that looked slightly too expensive for a man whose last 5 ventures had all failed. Elena, in high heels and diamond studs, breezed into my home like she hadn't skipped my birthday 2 weeks earlier. "Mother," she began, pouring herself a glass of water from my kitchen without asking. "We have the opportunity of a lifetime." I set aside my property ledger. "Do tell." David took over. "We're working with a firm out of Florida, cutting-edge sustainable resort properties. Think Napa Valley meets Silicon Valley, but beachfront. They're looking for early backers, and we thought of you." My stomach sank. I didn't even need to ask how much. I already knew. "Elena," I said slowly, "how much do you need?" "Only $150,000 to start," she replied brightly. But the returns, Mother, we're talking triple in under 2 years. I stood, walked into my study, and returned with a leather folder labeled Family Investments. I spread the contents on the coffee table. 3 projects, 3 failures. Organic smoothie chain. Loss, $38,000. Cryptocurrency mining gear. Loss, $42,500. Luxury import cars. Loss, $55,000. That's $135,500. I said, gone. Not invested. Gone. David shifted uncomfortably, but Elena's face hardened. Those were different. This is legitimate. We've done the research. And do you have the paperwork? The partners? The market feasibility study? Well, not on us, David said. I gently closed the folder. Then you don't have my money. The silence stretched between us. Then Elena snapped, You know, you always talk about how you built everything on your own, but we're your family. Do you expect us to start from scratch when you're sitting on all this? This, I said, gesturing around the room, was built from painting walls at 3 a.m., fixing broken toilets on Christmas morning, and saying no to handbags so I could afford roofing. It wasn't luck. It was labor. David opened his mouth, but Elena beat him to it. Fine. Don't help, but don't expect us to stick around when things get harder. You're not getting younger, Mom. And he's saying, again. They left shortly after, the front door closing harder than necessary. I stood alone in my quiet living room, watching their car peel away down the street, wondering how much of my giving had turned into entitlement. The next morning, the silence in the house was thicker than usual. Even the ticking of the old mantel clock seemed accusatory. I replayed Elena's words again and again. Don't expect us to stick around. It wasn't the first time she'd said something hurtful, but there was a finality to it this time. A warning, or maybe a promise. I tried to shake it off, made tea, watered the indoor ferns, checked on a leaking faucet in the guest bathroom. Anything to distract myself from the gnawing sense that I'd just witnessed the beginning of a slow departure. 2 days passed without a call, a text, a knock on the door. Then on Friday evening, just as the sun dipped low over Puget Sound, I got a message from Elena. We'll be busy for the next few weeks. Don't wait up. No love you, no talk soon, just distance thinly veiled as logistics. Later that night, I called her. Straight to voicemail. I tried again the next day. Same result. That evening, I emailed a simple message. I'd like to talk. Are you free tomorrow? No reply. By Sunday, I decided to do what I always did when the world turned cold. I made soup and waited for Ben. He showed up like he always did right at 3 p.m. Jacket unzipped, cheeks pink from the cold, a reusable grocery bag in hand with a loaf of sourdough and fresh goat cheese. Hey, Grandma, he said, stepping into the warmth of the foyer. Smells like heaven. You're late, I teased gently, though he wasn't. He hugged me tightly. Sorry, Mom was in a mood this morning. I poured him a bowl of soup and we settled at the kitchen table as we always did. But there was a heaviness in Ben's eyes, the kind that didn't come from midterms or lack of sleep. Ben, I asked carefully, is everything okay? He looked down at his bowl, then back up at me. Can I ask you something, and you promise not to freak out? I nodded. Have Mom or Dad talked to you recently about estate planning? I froze. Estate planning? You mean, like my will? Yeah, or power of attorney, stuff like that. I narrowed my eyes. Why? He leaned in, voice low. I overheard something. 2 nights ago. Mom was on the phone with someone, I think a lawyer. She said something about getting ahead of the paperwork before things get complicated. Then she said your name. My stomach clenched. What kind of paperwork? I don't know exactly. But then Dad chimed in and said, it'll be easier if she signs, while she's still sharp. The words hit like a slap, still sharp. As if my lucidity were slipping, as if they were counting the days. Ben, I whispered, are you sure? He nodded. I've never heard them talk like that. It didn't sound like a conversation with you in mind. It sounded like one about you. I stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, my driveway sat empty, the winter light casting long shadows on the brick path. A part of me wanted to deny it, chalk it up to misunderstanding, paranoia, or youthful exaggeration. But another part of me, the part that had learned to survive 4 recessions and countless tenant lawsuits, recognized the tone in Ben's voice, fear wrapped in love. "They wouldn't," I said aloud, unsure if I believed it. "I don't know what they're capable of anymore," Ben said quietly, "but I had to tell you." I turned to face him. "Thank you. That couldn't have been easy." He looked pained. "I love them. I do. But what they're doing, if they're trying to manipulate you, it's not right." I sat down again, every bone in my body suddenly heavier. "Your mother, she's always been driven. But this would be something else." Ben reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Just be careful, Grandma, and maybe don't sign anything for a while." I forced a small smile. "You think I go around signing papers without reading them? I think they're counting on you being tired, trusting, or feeling guilty." That last word stuck. Guilty. As if my decades of giving still weren't enough. As if refusing one more handout made me the villain in my own family story. After Ben left, I sat in my reading chair with the fireplace crackling. The shadows on the walls danced like old memories. Elena's first ballet recital, the mortgage burning party Daniel and I threw when we paid off our 5th building, Ben's 3rd birthday with the toy train set he never let go of. All those moments felt suddenly fragile, like paper dolls in the wind. Was I overreacting? Maybe. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a mother or a grandmother. I felt like a target. The knock on my door came just after 6:00 a.m., pounding and frantic, the kind that bypasses sleep and drills straight into your bones. I shuffled in my robe, barely awake, and opened the door to find my neighbor Frances standing there in a fleece jacket and slippers, her eyes wide with concern. "Margaret, you need to come see this." Still groggy, I followed her down the path to the front gate. That's when I saw it. My cedar fence, once perfectly upright and neatly painted, now shattered. 4 slats had been kicked clean through, and my mailbox was hanging by one screw. But it wasn't the destruction that stole my breath. It was the message. Spray painted across my pristine white front door in jagged red letters. "Selfish witch." The paint was still dripping. Frances clutched her coffee mug tighter. I saw a car idling out here around 3 a.m., dark blue SUV. Could have sworn it looked like David's. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but now, I don't know. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My breath had caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. I reached forward to touch the door, cold, wet, and unfamiliar. The word witch burned more than the paint. It was cruel, personal. The police came within the hour. A young officer named Ortega took notes, photographed everything, and asked the usual questions. Any enemies? Ex-tenants with grudges? Recent disputes? I told him the truth, that nothing like this had ever happened before. But inside, a different answer churned. This wasn't random. It was calculated, meant to shake me, meant to send a message. By noon, I'd scrubbed what I could off the door, the red smeared into pink streaks, leaving behind a ghost of the slur. I stood back and stared, unable to erase the residue from my chest. At 1:00 p.m., I received a text from Elena. "Heard about what happened. Awful. Probably just some bored kids. You should consider moving to a senior community with better security. We can help you find one. Love, E. Chung." I read it twice. The fake concern, the passive suggestion, the convenient timing. I didn't reply. Instead, I went to my desk and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Across the top, I wrote, "Unusual events, January." Below it, I listed everything. Jan 9. Elena and David request $150,000 investment. Declined. Jan 10. Text from Elena. Don't expect us to stick around. Jan 13. Frances reports hearing conversation about estate paperwork. Jan 16, fence vandalized. Selfish witch, painted on door. Blue SUV seen at 3 a.m. Next to the list, I circled a word, motive. Afterward, I called my longtime handyman Roy to replace the broken fence. Then I searched for security systems. I'd resisted installing cameras for years, priding myself on trusting neighbors and tenants. But this wasn't a tenant dispute. This was something darker. By that evening, I'd scheduled a technician to come on Thursday. Later that night, I made tea and sat in the living room, curtains pulled tight. Every small creak in the house felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the thermostat. I jumped when the mail slot clanged. No letter, just the wind maybe. Still, I jotted it down. Jan 16, 9:42 p.m. Possible noise at door. I wasn't losing my mind. I was documenting my reality. The next morning, I visited my favorite cafe. Not because I wanted coffee, I just needed to be around people. Normal people. As I stirred sugar into my cup, I couldn't help but overhear a group of retirees discussing recent break-ins. They're targeting older folks, one said. Single homeowners, real predators. Another replied, "That's why I put cameras everywhere. If my kids get upset about it, tough." It struck me how common the story had become. And yet, when it happened to me, it felt like an isolated storm. I wasn't just dealing with vandalism, I was dealing with betrayal. That afternoon, I received a second message from Elena. "Just checking in. Any updates on the police report? Still thinking about that senior community near Bellevue. Has great amenities. We could tour it together." I closed the message without replying. Instead, I printed it and added it to a manila folder now labeled Elena and David Communication Archive. If they wanted to act like I was slipping, like I was incapable, they would find a very different version of Margaret Ellison. Prepared, watchful, and relentless. That night, I took down the old wind chimes from the porch, ones Daniel gave me on our 20th anniversary. The clang of metal now felt like sirens. I replaced them with a motion-activated light. The next morning, I began cleaning out my office, something I'd avoided for years. Among old invoices and photos, I found a file labeled Ellison Legacy Trust, 2006. Daniel's handwriting was still on the cover. Inside, a note he had scribbled in red ink. "If something ever feels wrong, trust your gut, even if it's family." I sat there for a long time holding that note. The man had passed nearly 2 decades ago, but his voice was still the clearest one in the room. The printer in my home office groaned to life late Wednesday morning, spitting out a single page. I hadn't touched it. The screen still read idle. Confused, I approached, assuming perhaps an old print job had finally gone through. But when I picked up the page, my heart stopped. It wasn't a recipe or an invoice or anything I recognized. It was a document draft, header bolded in Times New Roman. Draft, transfer of power, Sullivan Trust Holdings. And there it was, 4 lines in, appointed legal agent, David Campbell. Below that, placeholders for signatures, notarization fields, and legal terms that reeked of corporate manipulation. I stood frozen, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. The printer had last been used by Ben. He'd come over on Sunday, borrowed my laptop for a school project, even printed out a few pages for a real estate class assignment. That's what he'd said. Was this part of it? I turned the page over as if hoping to find a punchline on the back. Nothing. Just more clauses, language about mental competence, streamlined asset transition, and a clause for expedited authority in cases of cognitive decline. Cognitive decline. I lowered myself slowly into my desk chair, heart racing. Could Ben have brought this here on purpose? Was he part of it now? No, that couldn't be. But doubt creeps like a leak in the roof. It doesn't pour all at once. It seeps quietly until the whole structure softens beneath you. I stared at the document for nearly 10 minutes before folding it twice and sliding it into the folder with the rest of my records. Then I sat still, listening, thinking, feeling betrayal mix with guilt, with fear, with shame. Was I becoming paranoid? Or just finally seeing the truth? By evening, I had convinced myself to do nothing. For now, just wait. Let the next move reveal itself. Ben showed up the next day, same time as always. He carried a stack of textbooks and a bag of frozen lasagna. "I figured we could have dinner here tonight," he said cheerfully, as if nothing in the world had changed. I tried to match his tone. "Sounds great." We sat through a meal of cautious small talk. I offered no mention of the document. Neither did he. After dinner, while I loaded the dishwasher, I heard him walk into the office. My pulse spiked. He came back holding the folder. "Grandma, you saw it, didn't you?" I paused, hand frozen over a damp dish. "I saw the printer output." "Yes." His face paled, and he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It wasn't supposed to print. I must have hit something by mistake. I was copying their files. I hacked into Dad's email." I blinked. "You what?" Ben sat down, his hands shaking slightly. "I've been tracking their conversations for weeks. I used Dad's old laptop. He never changed his password from my freshman year. He talks in riddles, but Mom's more direct. They've been working with a lawyer, James Fletcher. He's writing up papers that would make Dad the decision maker for your trust." My throat dried up. "And you printed it?" "I was trying to download everything and send it to a secure drive, but the printer was still connected and... I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." I exhaled slowly. "You scared me because it looked like you were part of it." "I know, and I don't blame you for thinking that, but Grandma, I'm trying to stop them." He reached into his bag and pulled out a flash drive. "There's more," he said. "Emails, draft contracts, even text logs. They've been planning to get you to sign over control during a surprise family gathering. Something about catching you off guard, making it look like you're choosing this freely." I took the drive in my hand. It was heavier than it should have been, not physically, but emotionally. "I didn't want to tell you until I had everything," Ben said. "But after that printout, I figured I better come clean." I looked into his eyes. Honest. Steady. So much like his grandfather's had been when we signed the deed on our first rental. Daniel always said trust wasn't given, it was proven, and in that moment, Ben had proven himself. "I believe you," I whispered, "and I'm proud of you." He blinked, relief flashing across his face like sunrise after a long night. "But we have to be smart," I continued. "No more accidents, no more surprises. We need to let them think I'm still unaware." Ben nodded. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." We agreed on a plan. I would continue acting normal, even receptive. Ben would keep monitoring their communications. We'd share updates every Sunday over tea like nothing had changed. I'd contact a new lawyer quietly, someone with no connection to the family. That night, after he left, I sat at my desk and reread the printed document. This time, I didn't feel panic. I felt purpose. They wanted a war built on manipulation. They were about to get one built on proof. The invitation arrived as a cheerful voicemail on Thursday morning. Elena's voice, light and practiced. "Hi, Mom. We're doing a little something for David's birthday. Just a few friends, some food, nothing too fancy. It's this Saturday at the Azure Bistro. Ben really wants you to come. Says he misses your Sunday talks. We'd love to have you there. Don't worry about a gift. Just bring yourself." Her tone was sweetened honey. Smooth, without a trace of tension, as if the last few weeks of silence and sabotage had never happened. But the mention of Ben, that was the dagger wrapped in ribbon. She knew exactly how to bait me. I called Ben the same afternoon. "She's using me to reel you in," he said plainly. "I didn't even know about the party until last night." I paused. "Do you think I should go?" "I think they're setting something up. But if you do go, don't eat anything, don't drink anything, and don't sign a single thing." Noted. Still, I said yes. I wore navy wool with pearl studs. Quiet elegance, nothing showy. I carried a small handbag, no checkbook, no legal documents, just my phone, keys, and the cold determination that had once helped me buy my first rental with $700 in savings and a vision. The Azure Bistro was nestled beside a golf course, its windows stretching tall and clean, catching the fading winter sun. I arrived exactly at 6:58 p.m., just as the hostess led me to the back room where Elena had reserved a private dining space. Ben greeted me near the door. His smile was genuine, but behind his eyes was tension, a subtle warning. "I'm glad you came," he whispered. "You look pale," I replied, brushing his cheek lightly. "I'm watching everything." Inside, the table had been set for 10. Crystal glasses, white linen, flickering votives. It was hardly the low-key dinner Elena had described. David stood and greeted me with open arms and a loud, performative cheer. "There she is, the legend herself." I offered a tight smile. As I sat, I scanned the room. I recognized no one beyond Elena, David, and Ben. The other guests, men in tailored suits, women with expensive blowouts, smiled too brightly. One leaned in almost immediately. "I've heard so much about your real estate portfolio, Mrs. Ellison," she said, her tone smooth as polished marble. "It must be so rewarding building something that'll last beyond you." I arched an eyebrow. "It's certainly been educational." Another guest chimed in. "What's your succession plan, if you don't mind me asking? Surely someone's already in place to take the reins." The table chuckled as if it were a harmless question, but I saw Elena's eyes flicker across the room, checking my reaction. "I'm still quite capable," I replied coolly, "and not planning to go anywhere just yet." David raised his glass. "To capability and legacy!" Glasses clinked. Mine remained untouched. A waiter appeared, refilling everyone's wine. Mine was poured with a generous hand, despite my earlier refusal. "Please, Mom," Elena said, gesturing at the glass. "Just one toast. For David." I lifted the glass, lips barely wetting, and set it back down. Dinner came. 3 courses of elegant nonsense I barely touched. Conversations circled over investment trends, asset diversification, power of attorney, and responsible retirement transitions. Twice, someone mentioned trust adjustments. 3 times, someone joked about how stubborn matriarchs can get when they're used to being in charge. Ben said little. He sat close, eyes scanning every pore, every plate, every glance. And then came the dizziness. It started as a warm flush behind my ears, then a wave, soft but insistent, rolling through my temples. I blinked and the room shimmered, the candlelight blurring into gold smears. Someone laughed too loudly. The joke was lost on me. Ben leaned in. "Grandma, you okay?" I nodded slightly, but my limbs felt unmoored. I gripped my fork tighter than necessary just to anchor myself. The wine, the slow spiral. Something wasn't right. Elena stood. "Before dessert, we thought it'd be fun to share memories, celebrate not just David, but the people who've supported us." A man to my left, one I hadn't heard speak all evening, cleared his throat. "I've worked with David on several consulting projects. His vision for modernizing real estate has always impressed me. With the right tools and authority, he could really streamline operations." Ben's hand slid under the table, pressing gently against my wrist. "They're close," he whispered. I forced a smile, playing along. "Oh, I'm sure David has plenty of ideas," I said, voice syrupy but firm. "But authority without ethics is just ambition in a suit." The room fell quiet for a moment. Then laughter returned, more forced this time. The dizziness deepened. My head swam like I'd taken cold medicine on an empty stomach. I touched my forehead, warm and damp. I looked around the table and realized suddenly I wasn't a guest. I was the main course. A man seated at the far end of the table stood up just as dessert menus were being passed around. He wore a charcoal suit that looked hand-stitched and carried a black leather briefcase with understated authority. His hair was silver at the temples and his smile too rehearsed. "Mrs. Ellison," he said with a crispness that immediately quieted the table, "I'm Gregory Langston. I work with David and Elena on their business advisory team." My stomach tightened. "I understand they've spoken with you about a potential equity partnership. I've prepared a brief summary, just a signature of intent, really. Would you mind stepping upstairs? The manager has reserved a private room for us to talk through it." Ben's fork clattered against his plate. The man continued smoothly. "Of course, there's no pressure. We just want to make sure your legacy is protected with proper documentation. David and Elena have your best interests at heart." I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the stem of my untouched wine glass. That's when Ben stood, quickly, decisively. I need to speak with my grandmother, alone, now. All eyes turned toward him, surprise flickering across the guests' faces like ripples across still water. Elena rose. Ben, sweetie. No. His voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Sharp, almost panicked. He leaned toward me, gently but firmly taking my arm. His voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. Grandma, they spiked your wine. I saw them. That guy with the briefcase? He's not just a lawyer. He's here to document your signature. Someone's live streaming from their phone in the corner, trying to capture you agreeing to hand over control. The blood drained from my face. My knees felt wobbly, not just from the drug beginning to take hold, but from the emotional earthquake. I looked around. The woman seated near the wall held her phone up in a way that seemed casual, but now I saw the screen's faint red circle. Recording. The man in the tailored suit was walking toward me slowly now, papers in hand. Mrs. Ellison, we can discuss everything in private. Just upstairs. No. The word came out shakier than I intended, but loud enough to stop him. I stood unsteady. Ben held my elbow, supporting me subtly. I won't be signing anything tonight, I said, raising my voice to address the room. In fact, I believe this entire evening was designed to coerce me into doing just that. Elena's expression twisted from surprise to fury in a blink. Mom, that's not fair. You've had too much to drink. I haven't touched your wine, I snapped, louder now. Not since the first toast when you insisted. But it's funny how quickly the room spins after half a glass, isn't it? The man with the briefcase cleared his throat. Mrs. Ellison, there's no need to cause a scene. A scene? I laughed, short, sharp, and bitter. Let me tell you something, Mr. Langston, or whatever your real name is. I built my life by reading fine print and trusting no one who arrives with a signature page and a smile. So believe me when I say, this isn't a scene. It's a reckoning. Gasps. Awkward shifts in chairs. Forks paused mid-bite. David stood. Margaret, please. Let's not ruin the evening. You ruined it the moment you thought I'd be weak enough to trick. I turned to face Elena fully. How dare you use Ben as bait? How dare you try to paint this as a celebration when it's a setup? Her voice dropped to a hiss. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough. I know you've been planning this. I know you recruited a lawyer. I know you tried to drug me, and I know you'll never touch my business again. Her face reddened, her eyes glinting with something feral beneath the polished exterior. But she said nothing, not in front of the guests. I turned to Ben. Let's go. Together, we walked past stunned faces and unfinished desserts through the heavy doors of the private dining room and out into the cool night air. As soon as we reached the sidewalk, I exhaled so deeply it felt like the first real breath in hours. Ben held my coat for me, his hands trembling just slightly. Grandma, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure they'd really do it. I thought maybe I was overreacting, but then I saw her hand the vial to David. He poured it while distracting the waiter. You saved me, I said quietly. He shook his head. Not yet, but I'm going to. I squeezed his hand. You already did. The wind picked up, and with it came clarity. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was war. And I had just declared my position. The emergency room was cold, bright, and humming with fluorescent indifference. I sat upright on a plastic gurney, my coat draped across my lap, Ben pacing beside me. It had taken every ounce of strength to get into the cab, every breath to hold myself together long enough to reach the hospital. But once inside, I collapsed into action. I may have been drugged, I told the triage nurse. Wine? At a dinner. I didn't finish it, but something's wrong. The nurse blinked, processing the statement, then nodded sharply. We'll run a tox screen immediately. They drew blood and sent it off to the lab while Ben sat at my side, hands clenched, legs bouncing. Do you think it'll show up? He asked quietly. If I'm right, yes. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize later, but I'm not wrong. 45 minutes passed, an hour. I sipped water slowly, feeling the weight of the dizziness begin to lift, though my limbs still buzzed with something unnatural. Ben showed the nurse the text messages he'd saved from his mother, the emails he'd pulled from his father's account, and the names of the dinner guests. Especially the so-called lawyer. When the doctor finally returned, he had a paper in one hand and a wrinkle between his brows. "Mrs. Ellison, you were right to come in. We found trace amounts of ace promazine in your system." "Ace what?" "Ace promazine," he repeated. "It's a veterinary sedative, primarily used for large animals. Horses, in particular, not meant for human consumption. It would explain the dizziness, blurred vision, slowed coordination. You're lucky you didn't drink more." I felt something harden in my chest. The confirmation I'd needed. The horrifying proof. How long does it stay in the blood? We can still detect traces for several hours after ingestion, sometimes longer depending on dosage. But you were smart to come in immediately. I nodded slowly. "Can you print that report for me? I'll need to give it to the police." He agreed without hesitation. The officers arrived shortly after. A young woman and an older man, detective maybe. I gave them my name, a detailed statement of what happened at the dinner, and the history that led to it. I showed them the vandalism photos, the email printout from my home office, and now the hospital's test results. Ben added his part, carefully but thoroughly. He described overhearing his mother and father discussing coercive strategies, the list of steps they planned to follow, even the names of the lawyer and the live stream setup. The officers listened with quiet seriousness, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. "Were any papers presented to you during this dinner?" the woman asked. "Yes," I said. "A man named Gregory Langston tried to get me to follow him upstairs. He had documents. Said they were part of an equity agreement." "And you refused to sign?" "I refused everything." They nodded and exchanged a glance. "We'll open a formal investigation immediately," the male officer said. "Attempted fraud and attempted poisoning are serious charges. This isn't just elder coercion. It could rise to conspiracy and criminal endangerment." I stared down at my hands. They were shaking. "This was my daughter," I said quietly. "And her husband." Neither officer blinked. "Families often involved in these cases," the woman said gently. "It doesn't make it any less criminal." After they left, Ben and I sat in silence in the waiting room. The lights buzzed softly above us. The vending machine blinked, out of order. Somewhere behind the nurse's station, someone laughed too loudly. I stared at the floor, my mind numb. Then my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Hi, Mom. Just wanted to check in. You made it home safe, right? Tonight was meant to be special. We just wanted you to feel appreciated. Maybe you misunderstood. Let's talk soon. Love you. Helena." She was pretending like nothing had happened, as if the wine hadn't been laced, as if I'd imagined it all. I didn't reply. I showed the message to Ben, who read it, his lips thinning. "She's trying to rewrite the story. In her version, you're overreacting, paranoid, confused." "She'll tell everyone I was emotional," I muttered, "that I embarrassed the family, that I stormed out. She's counting on you to stay silent." I stared at the screen. Then slowly, I typed a response. "I was not confused. The hospital confirmed everything. You drugged me. The police have been notified. Don't contact me again unless it's through a lawyer." Then I blocked her number. It didn't matter what narrative she tried to craft. The truth was now documented. And for the first time, I wasn't letting shame or fear quiet my voice. Ben leaned over, resting his hand gently over mine. "You okay?" I nodded. "No, but I will be." Maria Santos' law office sat on the 8th floor of a modest brick building overlooking downtown Seattle. No marble lobbies, no gold plaques, just a name on frosted glass and a quiet receptionist who offered tea with a firm handshake. Ben accompanied me that morning. He sat in the waiting room while I entered the conference room alone, clutching a folder thick with medical reports, police statements, and 40 years of financial records. Maria was precise. Sharp gray bob, slate eyes, and a tone that left no room for interpretation. "Mrs. Ellison, I've reviewed everything you sent over," she said, sliding a copy of my toxicology report across the table. "You were drugged. You were nearly coerced into signing over control of your assets. What we're dealing with is criminal, not just morally reprehensible. I nodded. What do we do? Step 1, we revoke all standing powers of attorney, financial, and medical. Your daughter currently holds both in secondary clauses of your living trust. Clauses I doubt you were ever made fully aware of. My stomach turned. They hid them in the documents? Buried deep. Legal, but highly unethical. We'll dissolve the existing trust and form a new one under a different legal framework. It will isolate your assets, designate a third-party fiduciary, and make you untouchable. Good. She tapped her pen against her legal pad. Step 2, we alert the authorities that the attorney who appeared at the dinner, Mr. Langston, is operating under a lapsed license. He hasn't been a member of the Washington Bar since 2019. That opens up fraud charges, impersonation, and obstruction. I felt the edge of my spine straighten. It was the first time in days that something, anything, felt like control. Step 3, she continued, you'll need to draft a formal affidavit documenting every attempt of coercion, every manipulation. Ben's statement will be filed as a corroborating witness. I nodded, already reaching into my folder. We spent 2 hours working through documentation, property deeds, bank transfers, even old birthday cards that hinted at strained relations over money. Finally, she said, I'll file the revocation notices today, but there's something else. Her tone shifted, colder now. I've been working in family estate law for nearly 30 years, she said, but I've never seen something so deliberate. Your daughter and her husband weren't just trying to get ahead of your will. They constructed a full-scale legal coup. I sighed. They nearly succeeded. She leaned forward. That's what concerns me. Because to pull this off, they needed access to very specific legal knowledge, access only someone close to your estate would have. I frowned. What are you saying? Maria opened a file I hadn't seen before. Inside were printed emails, header, metadata, timestamps, routing codes. At the top was a name I knew intimately, Stanley Green, Escrows. My personal attorney for the past 15 years. He helped me draft my first will after Daniel passed, I said, voice low. He's the one who handled all my real estate contracts. Maria nodded grimly. He also had private access to your trust, including the digital signatures required for amendments. We traced 2 backdoor modifications made in the last 6 months, one that elevated David Campbell to successor trustee, and another that added language authorizing medical guardianship transfers upon perceived cognitive decline. My breath caught. He did this behind my back? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. How much did David pay him? We don't know yet. But I've already filed a request for Green's financial disclosures. If money moved, we'll find it. I stared at the table, the polished wood blurring before my eyes. 15 years of professional trust shattered with a few keystrokes. A man who'd dined at my home, who'd toasted Daniel's memory, had quietly laid the legal foundation for my betrayal. Ben knocked gently on the door. Maria waved him in. We're done, she said, her voice softening slightly. I'll begin the legal transition today. Your new trust will be locked down by tomorrow morning, and Stanley Green will be facing a disbarment inquiry by end of week. I stood slowly. I felt hollow, even as protection formed around me, like watching someone rebuild your house after a fire, grateful but still surrounded by smoke. As we rode the elevator down, Ben glanced over. What happened? Green was compromised, I said. David bought him. Ben's face twisted. I'll find proof. No, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. Let them dig. Let the investigators do their jobs. You've done enough, sweetheart. We exited into the cold Seattle morning, the wind sharp and sobering. I walked past a bus stop where a mother scolded her child, then into a corner cafe where steam curled from paper cups. The world kept spinning, utterly oblivious to the storm I'd just walked through. Back home, I opened my office closet, pulled out my oldest lockbox, and began sorting. Notes, photos, a flash drive with duplicates of every document Maria had collected. A second one with Ben's screenshots and emails. I wasn't just protecting my business anymore. I was preparing for battle. But not with shouts or lawyers or media, with insights, with evidence, with patience. Let them wonder what I knew. Let them doubt who had what. I'd already learned the truth. Even the trusted can be turned. Even the closest allies can be bought. But if they thought that left me defenseless, they hadn't paid attention to the empire I'd built. I didn't survive 71 years by being soft. Now, I would finish this. Quietly. Decisively. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk with a mug of cold tea and an open spreadsheet. Names, dates, account numbers, and evidence. Every scrap I'd collected from the files Maria Santos had helped me compile. The longer I stared at the rows, the more my purpose sharpened. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about justice. Quiet, systematic, and permanent. By sunrise, I had assembled 12 discrete envelopes. Inside each, a simple one-page letter, typed in neutral language and unsigned. Accompanying it, printed documentation showing unauthorized withdrawals, falsified investment statements, and timelines. Carefully anonymized but clear enough that any accountant worth their salt would catch the fraud. Each letter began the same way. You are receiving this because someone you trusted may have betrayed that trust. Please review the enclosed documentation and seek legal counsel. You are not alone. Others have been affected. The enclosed records have been verified by independent legal professionals. There is no catch, no request, only truth. A concerned party. The recipients were all clients of Pinnacle Financial, mostly elderly, mostly women, and most notably all handled by one person, Elena Campbell. I paid a local courier service in cash. No trace, no return address. Delivery by noon. Next came the banks. David's debt trail had once been a ghost. Names of shell companies, borrowed credibility, vague references to family backing. But thanks to Maria and a few private investigators, she kept on retainer. I now had 4 bank branches that had extended loans based on falsified guarantees. Some listed Sullivan properties as collateral, without my knowledge. Some used forged documents allegedly signed by me. All bore traces of David's fabrication. To each bank, I sent notarized affidavits, accompanied by documentation proving I had no involvement in the loan applications. My name had been used without consent. The collateral assets did not belong to David. This time, I signed each letter. To whom it may concern, I, Margaret Ellison, certify under penalty of perjury that I was neither aware of nor complicit in the loan applications referencing Sullivan Properties as financial backing. The attached records constitute fraudulent use of personal and business assets. I request an immediate investigation into the validity of the documents submitted and the parties responsible for submitting them. Respectfully, Margaret Ellison. Within 48 hours, the first domino fell. Pinnacle Financial opened an internal investigation into Elena. A compliance officer contacted each of the 12 recipients I'd notified. When 4 of them presented matching documentation, the evidence became impossible to ignore. By Friday morning, Elena was suspended. No access to her office, no client contact pending a full audit. The news hadn't even reached the rest of the firm yet, but word spread fast among clients. By Saturday, 6 more had filed complaints. One even contacted a financial journalist she knew from college. That same weekend, I watched from my kitchen window as a local TV reporter stood outside Pinnacle's downtown branch, microphone in hand. Sources tell us a senior advisor is under internal review after allegations of fraud involving elderly clients. The firm has yet to release a public statement, but legal experts say the consequences could be severe. That night, I made popcorn, watched it twice. David's reckoning came next. First National Bank froze his line of credit. Columbia Trust placed a lien on one of his cars. 2 smaller institutions filed suit by Monday morning, citing misrepresentation, collateral fraud, and identity falsification. He was served while walking out of the gym. Ben showed me the photo. Someone had uploaded it to a legal gossip blog. David, sweaty and stunned, holding a thick envelope with the kind of posture only real consequences bring. And still, no one knew I was behind it. I hadn't stepped in front of a microphone. I hadn't confronted Elena or David directly. I hadn't screamed or posted or demanded apologies. I had simply handed truth to the right hands and let gravity do the rest. Maria called that afternoon. Her voice was a mix of pride and caution. "They'll know soon enough," she warned, David especially. "These suits are too coordinated, and Elena, well, she's unraveling." "I don't need them to know," I said. "I just need them to lose." The silence that followed was thick with approval. Maria continued, "One more thing. A reporter from the Seattle Ledger is working on a full exposé. She's been contacted by at least 5 of Elena's clients. They've named names. She wants to talk to you." "No interviews," I said quickly. "Not yet? You sure? She's fair, and you get to shape the narrative." I don't want a narrative," I said. "I want protection. For me, for Ben, and consequences for them. You're getting all 3. After the call, I sat in the same chair where I'd once written checks for Elena's tuition, for David's failed ventures, for braces and birthdays and broken-down cars. That night, those checks felt like ashes, but the weight of silence, of action without noise, had never felt heavier in my hand, and oh, how it moved mountains. It happened on a Wednesday morning. The headlines came first, bold and unmissable. Real estate consultant and suspended financial advisor detained at SeaTac Airport in attempted flight from prosecution. Accompanied by a blurry photo of David in handcuffs and a woman with long blonde hair shielding her face. Rachel. I stared at her in disbelief. Rachel Monroe. Former veterinary assistant, once introduced to me briefly at a family cookout as a friend of a friend. Now standing beside David Campbell at a TSA checkpoint, caught with fake identification and $14,000 in cash, along with an overnight bag containing unmarked prescription bottles. Ben hadn't seen the news yet. I knew, because the house was still quiet. He was in the garage organizing property inspection forms for our Thursday rounds. I could hear the soft hum of the label printer and the occasional thump of boxes being shifted. I lowered the paper slowly and walked to the kitchen window. The garden looked unchanged. Roses blooming in symmetrical rows, lavender hedges trimmed, but everything else was upside down. According to the article, David and Rachel had planned to board a 6:10 a.m. flight to Vancouver, then connect to Seoul using Rachel's dual citizenship. They were attempting to leave the country before the lawsuits turned criminal, and, twist of all twists, Rachel was 6 months pregnant, David's child. My hands gripped the countertop. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was cowardice. Abandonment. A man ready to leave his wife and son and disappear with the very woman who had helped drug the mother of his child. Rachel had supplied the ace promazine. It was all coming together now. The veterinary connection, the quiet dinners she had attended without explanation, the whispers that followed. Her presence at the dinner that night hadn't been a coincidence. It was strategy. She was there to manage the drug, to ensure the dosage was just right. And David had been sleeping with her the entire time. I stared at the kitchen clock. 8:43 a.m. Ben would be coming in soon for breakfast. The moment pressed down on me like stone. Do I tell him? Do I destroy whatever slivers of innocence he still clung to about his father? I folded the paper and placed it inside a drawer, not to hide it, just to delay the storm I knew was coming. He'd find out eventually, but maybe not today. Maybe not from me. Ben walked in 15 minutes later, holding 2 clipboards and a pen in his mouth. "I've finally figured out the tenant notes for 4th and Union," he said cheerfully. "Mrs. Tran isn't late on rent. Her bank sent the check to the wrong P.O. box." I nodded, smiling despite the weight in my chest. "You're good at this, you know." He grinned. "Learning from the best." We made omelets together, joked about broken mailboxes and eccentric tenants. For 1 hour, I let him believe the world was still in place. But the world doesn't wait for anyone. At 10:07 a.m., Ben's phone buzzed. 3 times. He picked it up, glanced down, and froze. His face shifted, color draining, jaw tightening. "What is this?" He turned the screen toward me. The same article, this time from a social media feed with Rachel's blurred face circled in red and the caption, "Pregnant vet tech nabbed with lover in real estate fraud scandal." "Is this real?" he whispered. I didn't answer. "You knew," he said. Not a question, a statement. "You saw this before I did." Still, I said nothing. Ben stepped back like he'd been slapped. "She was pregnant? Dad was leaving the country? With her?" Tears began pooling at the corners of his eyes, but he didn't blink them away. "He was going to leave us? Me and Mom?" I finally spoke. "Yes." Ben's mouth opened, but no words came. His body trembled. The clipboard he still held dropped to the floor with a dull clatter. He lied to everyone. To me. And she gave you the drug, didn't she? I nodded slowly. Ben turned away, bearing his face in his hands. "I thought maybe he was just desperate," he whispered. "I thought maybe Mom pushed him too far. I thought there was something left to save." I walked to him, placed my hand on his shoulder, but he didn't look up. He was crying now. Not loud, not messy, but deeply. Quiet sobs that shook his entire frame. "I'm sorry," I said. "I wanted to protect you from this for one more day, but I should have told you." He turned, his eyes red, his voice shaking. "There's nothing left to protect. My family is gone." I pulled him into my arms, and he didn't resist. Just stood there shaking. We stayed like that for a long time, and as I held him, I realized something profound. This wasn't about money. It never really had been. It was about watching the people you loved dissolve into something unrecognizable. It was about betrayal so deep it cracked your foundation, not just the empire you'd built, but the trust that made building anything worthwhile in the first place. David was gone. Elena was unraveling. Rachel would face charges. But Ben still stood beside me, and that meant there was something worth salvaging from the wreckage, even if it hurt like hell to get there. The courtroom smelled of old carpet, cheap perfume, and ink. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of reporters, former clients, and silent witnesses to a slow-burning collapse. Elena sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a pale blazer and muted lipstick, trying to look composed, but her hands trembled, tiny betrayals of the chaos within. David, 2 chairs away, wore a suit too tight at the shoulders and a blank stare that didn't quite mask the shame in his posture. Rachel sat behind them, arms crossed over her swollen stomach, flanked by 2 court-appointed attorneys. She didn't speak during the entire proceeding, not even when the judge read aloud the formal charges: fraud, medical misconduct, attempted elder coercion. I sat in the 3rd row, flanked by Maria Santos and a silent Ben. He hadn't spoken much since the article dropped, but he'd insisted on coming today. When the gavel came down, it landed like a final breath. Elena Campbell, 5 years in federal custody. Probation barred from working in financial services. David Campbell, 4 years on multiple counts of fraud, plus a court order to pay restitution to affected lenders. Rachel Monroe, loss of veterinary license, community supervision, and stripped of all custody rights once the child was born. And then, silence. No tears, no outbursts, just the slow creak of movement as everyone stood, adjusted jackets, collected bags, as if the end of a family was just another item on the docket. We exited into the cold morning light. Seattle's sky was overcast, the breeze sharp with salt from the sound. I thought I'd feel something more, Ben said quietly as we walked. Relief, maybe, or anger. But mostly, I just feel empty. "You've lost a family," I said. "Even when they betrayed you, it's still a loss." He nodded. "But I didn't lose you." We walked the rest of the block in silence. Later that week, he knocked on my study door. I was going over rental maintenance schedules and occupancy reports, tasks that once energized me but now felt like routine more than passion. Ben entered slowly, hands in his pockets. I want to learn, he said, all of it. Property law, maintenance contracts, tenant screening, the boring parts, the hard parts. I don't want to inherit anything I didn't earn. I looked up, studying the face that reminded me so much of Daniel. Quiet intensity, the same stubborn integrity. You don't have to prove anything to me, I said. I know, he replied, but I want to prove it to myself. That weekend, I drove him to the first property I ever owned, a duplex on Pine Street with peeling shutters and a mailbox held together by duct tape and optimism. This is where it started, I said as we stepped onto the cracked front steps. 2 units, $18,000 mortgage at 11% interest, a broken furnace, and tenants who paid late every month. Ben smiled. Sounds inspiring. It was, I said, because I fixed every problem myself. I called the plumber, patched the roof, chased rent with handwritten notes and polite threats. I learned the business with my hands before I ever learned it with my pen. I handed him a small folder. Inside were deed papers, maintenance contracts, and a new business license, his name listed under managing partner. You're giving this to me? I'm letting you manage it, I said. You'll report every dollar. Handle every repair. I'll guide you, but you'll build the reputation yourself. Ben stared at the folder, speechless. I can't promise it'll be easy, I added. In fact, it'll probably be miserable some days. I don't care, he said. I just want to build something real. We toured the property together. The tenants were polite but wary, understandable given the transition. Ben took notes, asked smart questions, and even fixed a stuck door handle with nothing but a screwdriver and a little sweat. I watched quietly, pride swelling like a tide. Later that evening, as we sat on the porch of the duplex watching traffic pass, Ben said, "Do you ever think about forgiving them?" It took me a long time to answer. I've stopped trying to feel what I'm supposed to feel, I said. Forgiveness isn't a gift I owe them. But peace, that's something I owe myself. Ben nodded. I don't think I'm ready yet either, he said. But I don't hate them, I just see them for who they really are now. And who are you? I asked. He turned to me. Someone who knows better. Someone who wants to do better. And in that moment, I knew he was the legacy I'd always hoped for. Not in bloodline, in integrity. It arrived on a Thursday, folded neatly inside an envelope with no return address, just a postmark from the Federal Detention Center in Oregon. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Elena. I stared at the letter for a long time before opening it. My heart didn't pound, and I wasn't angry, only still, like the way the ocean quiets after a storm. The paper inside was crisp, the ink a little smudged in places, like she'd pressed too hard or maybe paused mid-sentence more than once. Mom, there's no way to begin this without admitting how badly I failed you. I could say I was desperate, that I thought I was saving our family. But the truth is, I was greedy, entitled, and cruel. You gave me everything, education, security, unconditional love, and I returned it with betrayal. Not just once, but over and over again. And the worst part, I convinced myself you owed it to me. That somehow, everything you built should belong to me simply because I existed. But I see now, you didn't build it for me, you built it for yourself, for survival, for pride, for independence. I was supposed to learn from it, not steal it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll believe I truly am sorry. With all my shame, Elena. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into the small cedar box where I kept a few photographs and the deed to my first building. I wasn't sure yet what to feel, but maybe, just maybe, it was the first honest thing Elena had written in years. Later that afternoon, I was in the attic searching for old maintenance logs to show Ben when I came across a shoebox wrapped in a faded red ribbon. Daniel's handwriting was scrawled across the lid. For Maggie, only open when you truly don't know what to do. My breath caught. I sat down on the dusty floor, sunlight cutting in through a crack in the window like a single spotlight, and opened the box. Inside, a yellowed piece of stationery and Daniel's familiar looping script. My love, If you're reading this, then something has gone terribly wrong. Maybe someone betrayed you. Maybe life turned upside down. I don't know the details, but I know you. You've always given your whole self to the people you love. You never knew how to hold back. But if the day ever comes when that love is thrown back in your face, don't waste time trying to glue the pieces back together. Let it break, let them go, and hold on to yourself, because you, Maggie, you were the masterpiece all along. Not the family, not the buildings, not even us. Just you. That's enough. I love you. Always will. D. Tears rolled freely now, not from pain, from release. I pressed the paper to my chest, the attic spinning gently around me, and for the first time in months, I felt rooted again. Daniel had seen the truth long before I had, and he'd left me the words to survive it. That evening, I found Ben in the garage, sorting through plumbing receipts with oil smudged on his cheek. "Come with me," I said. "Where?" "Somewhere important." We drove in silence through the city, past neighborhoods that had changed a dozen times since I bought my first property, past streets that now held coffee shops where laundromats used to stand. Eventually, we stopped in front of a narrow 3-story brownstone with ivy crawling up one side, 401 Ashwood Lane, the very first building I ever bought. It had been renovated since, new paint, modern fixtures, but the bones were still the same. I ran a hand along the brick like greeting an old friend. "This is where it all started," I said. "One tenant, one leaky roof, one impossible dream." Ben stood beside me quietly. "You still own it?" he asked. "Of course. Some things you don't let go of." The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the windows. I turned to him. They tried to take my name, my work, my reputation. But none of that mattered in the end, because they couldn't take you. Ben looked at me, his eyes full. "They couldn't take the only thing worth inheriting." I smiled. "They took my money, but you, Ben, you're my greatest asset." He laughed softly, brushing a tear from his cheek. "I won't let you down." "I know." We stood there for a long time, watching the lights flicker on one by one across the building, tenants arriving home, families cooking dinner, life continuing, a new chapter beginning, not with fanfare, but with peace, with truth, with legacy redefined, not by blood, but by choice. And with that, the story closed, not on loss, but on what we chose to protect when everything else fell away, ourselves, each other, and what we'd build next.